The cruelest doors are not the ones locked by strangers, but the ones left closed by the person who promised to stand beside you. Amara Bennett stood beneath the golden canopy of the Grand Meridian Hotel in Manhattan, one hand resting lightly on the invitation inside her navy clutch, the other smoothing the front of a dress she had chosen for its quiet elegance rather than its price. Around her, black cars curved along the rain-darkened street like polished shadows, releasing women in diamond earrings and men in tailored tuxedos who moved toward the gala entrance as if the marble steps had been built only for them. Camera flashes burst against the glass doors. Laughter drifted through the cold October air. Somewhere inside, a string quartet was playing something soft and expensive, the kind of music meant to make wealth feel gentle. Amara had not come for the cameras. She had not come to be admired. She had come because the Whitmore Foundation was announcing a new scholarship fund that night, a program for first-generation college students from overlooked neighborhoods. And for the past 14 months, she had worked after midnight, through weekends, through budget meetings and school visits, to help make that promise real. Her name was printed on drafts no guest would ever read. Her fingerprints lived in every application form, every mentorship plan, every letter mailed to a student who had almost stopped believing college was possible. But when she reached the velvet rope, the woman holding the guest tablet gave her a smile so thin it felt rehearsed. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Amara Bennett," Amara said. The woman typed, paused, typed again, then let her eyes travel from Amara's simple dress to her natural curls pinned carefully at the nape of her neck. "I'm sorry," she said, though nothing in her voice carried apology. "You're not on the VIP list." Amara opened her clutch and removed the cream invitation, its gold lettering catching the light. "There may be a mistake. I was personally invited by the foundation office." The woman glanced at it for less than a second. General invitations are handled at the side entrance. A few people behind Amara slowed down. Someone whispered. Someone laughed quietly into a champagne-colored scarf. Amara felt the old familiar weight of being studied before being known, measured before being heard. She lifted her chin, not high enough to look proud, only high enough to keep her dignity from falling. "I'm not here for a seat near the stage," she said calmly. "I'm here because I helped build the program being honored tonight." The woman's smile tightened, but before she could answer, a voice like chilled glass floated from the doorway. "How inspiring." Brianna Vale stepped into the spill of chandelier light, wrapped in silver satin. Her blonde hair swept into the kind of effortless perfection that had taken hours to create. She looked at Amara the way some people looked at a stain on white linen, with disappointment disguised as concern. "These events do attract the most unusual stories," Brianna said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "But the foundation has strict security for a reason." Amara did not flinch. Her eyes moved past Brianna, through the open doors, across the crowded ballroom glowing with crystal and candlelight. And then she saw him. Nathaniel Whitmore stood near the center of the room in a black tuxedo, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand, his white face half lit by the camera flashes. Her husband. The man who had once held her hand in a quiet courthouse outside Boston and promised that privacy did not mean shame. The man who had told her that when the time was right, he would introduce her to the world not as a secret, but as his wife. For one breath, Amara believed he would come. She believed love would move faster than fear. Their eyes met across the distance, and the noise of the gala seemed to fade until all that remained was the silent question in her gaze. "Will you stand beside me now?" Nathaniel's hand tightened around the glass. Brianna turned, following Amara's eyes, and her smile widened with the cruelty of someone who had found the exact place to press. "Nathaniel," she called, smooth and bright, "do you know this woman?" The question traveled through the entrance hall like a spark catching silk. Conversations softened. Phones lowered, then lifted again. The security guard beside the velvet rope shifted uncomfortably. Amara stood still, her invitation held between two fingers, her wedding ring hidden beneath the soft fold of her glove. Nathaniel looked from Brianna to Amara, then to the donors surrounding him, the board members, the photographers, the world he had spent his whole life trying not to disappoint. His mouth opened. For a heartbeat, Amara saw the man she had married fighting to reach the surface. Then his expression closed like a door. "She must be mistaken," Nathaniel said, his voice steady enough to sound official. "I don't know her." The sentence did not echo. It sank. It fell through Amara's chest with a quietness no one else could hear. Brianna's eyes glittered. The woman with the tablet looked relieved. The guests resumed breathing, now with something sharper in the air, something eager and unkind. Amara looked at Nathaniel for one final second, not with anger, not even with shock, but with the terrible calm of a woman watching a promise choose its own grave. Then she folded the invitation once, placed it gently on the reception table, and said, "Then perhaps the mistake is larger than my name." For several seconds, no one moved. The entrance hall of the Grand Meridian seemed to hold its breath beneath the shimmer of crystal light and polished gold. Amara Bennett stood with her empty hand still resting above the invitation she had placed on the reception table, her fingers calm, her face unreadable, while the words Nathaniel Whitmore had spoken settled around her like winter dust. She must be mistaken. I do not know her. They were not shouted. They were not cruel in volume. That was what made them worse. They had been delivered with the clean precision of a man signing a contract, and everyone in the room had accepted them as truth because power often wears a tuxedo and speaks softly. Brianna Vale stepped closer, the silver of her gown catching the light, as if the room itself had chosen her side. "There you have it," she said, her voice sweet enough to make the humiliation look polite. "It appears there has been some confusion." The woman with the tablet nodded. Quickly, grateful for permission to stop pretending uncertainty. "Miss Bennett, we will need you to step aside. The main entrance is reserved for confirmed guests." Amara looked at her, then at the security guard standing near the velvet rope. He was a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes, the kind of employee who had learned to follow orders while quietly wishing people would be kinder. He did not reach for her. He only lowered his voice and said, "Ma'am, I am sorry, but I have to ask you to move away from the door." That small apology nearly hurt more than the public insult, because it was the first human thing anyone at that entrance had offered her. Inside the ballroom, Nathaniel remained where he was, surrounded by donors and board members, his posture perfect, his expression controlled. But Amara knew him too well. She saw the muscle working in his jaw. She saw the way his eyes avoided the ring finger of her left hand. She saw the fear he had dressed up as responsibility. Only 6 months earlier, in a quiet courthouse 200 miles away, he had held both of her hands and told her that secrecy was temporary. He had said his family needed time, the company needed stability, the press would twist the story, and the world they lived in was complicated. Amara had wanted to believe that love could survive a season of patience. She had not understood that patience, when demanded only from the person with less power, could become another name for silence. Brianna tilted her head, studying Amara with a practiced look of concern. "You seem like a bright woman," she said. "Surely you understand how awkward this is for everyone." Amara finally turned to her. "Awkward is when a seating chart is wrong," she said, her voice low and even. "This is something else." A faint ripple moved through the guests closest to them. Brianna's smile flickered, then returned sharper than before. "Careful," she murmured. "People are watching." Amara looked toward the phones raised discreetly at chest level, the lenses pretending not to be hungry. "Then they should watch closely," she said. "It may teach them the difference between class and kindness." For the first time, Brianna had no immediate answer. The security guard cleared his throat, uncomfortable but trapped inside his duty. Amara spared him from having to ask again. She picked up her clutch, smoothed the edge of her glove, and stepped away from the velvet rope with the quiet control of a woman who refused to let strangers decide how much she was worth. Behind her, the gala resumed its golden rhythm. Glasses chimed. Music lifted. Laughter returned too quickly, as if the room had agreed to bury what had happened beneath perfume and expensive flowers. Nathaniel watched her move toward the side corridor, and something inside him seemed to lean forward, but his feet did not follow. That was the second betrayal. Not the sentence he had spoken, but the silence he allowed to remain after it. Amara reached the long hallway beside the ballroom, where framed photographs of past foundation ceremonies lined the walls. In each one, wealthy guests smiled beside oversized checks, their generosity captured under perfect lighting. She stopped before a photo of children standing outside a newly renovated school in Queens, their backpacks bright, their faces hopeful. She recognized 3 of them. She had interviewed their families herself. She had sat at kitchen tables where parents worked double shifts and still apologized for not offering better coffee. She had listened to teenagers explain dreams they were afraid to say out loud because disappointment had already visited their homes too many times. That was why she had come tonight. Not for Nathaniel's name, not for the Whitmore spotlight. For them. Her eyes burned, but she did not let the tears fall. Tears were not weakness, but tonight, she knew, people would misunderstand even those. She opened her clutch and touched the folded copy of her speech, the one no one had asked her to give, though half the numbers in the chairman's report had come from her work. At the far end of the hallway, a service elevator opened with a soft bell. Amara did not turn at first. She thought it was a waiter, perhaps another staff member carrying trays of champagne into a room where dignity had just been treated like an accessory. Then the hallway changed. The air grew still. Conversations near the ballroom entrance faded one by one. A silver cane touched the marble floor with a measured sound. Once, twice. Amara lifted her eyes toward the reflection in the glass frame before her. An older man in a black evening coat stepped from the elevator, his white hair neatly combed, his face lined not with softness but with history. Chairman Charles Whitmore had arrived. Chairman Charles Whitmore did not hurry, yet the entire hallway seemed to rearrange itself around his arrival. The two assistants behind him stopped near the elevator, carrying leather folders and the careful expressions of people who understood that power did not always need an announcement. Charles moved forward with his silver cane tapping softly against the marble, each step measured, each breath calm, his eyes fixed on Amara Bennett, as if the noise from the ballroom had become something distant and unimportant. Amara turned fully toward him, her clutch pressed lightly against her side, her face still composed though the ache behind her eyes had not faded. She had met Charles only a handful of times in private foundation meetings, always in rooms where he listened more than he spoke and noticed more than people expected. He had never treated her like a decoration beside Nathaniel. He had asked about student retention numbers, family income barriers, transportation costs, application deadlines, and whether the children who received scholarships would also receive mentors after the cameras left. That was why she respected him. Not because he was wealthy, but because he understood that charity without accountability was only theater. "Miss Bennett," he said gently, though his voice carried down the corridor with unmistakable authority. "Why are you standing out here?" Before Amara could answer, Brianna Vale appeared at the mouth of the hallway, followed by the event coordinator, the woman with the tablet, and several guests pretending they had not come to witness the next scene. Nathaniel stepped out last, his face pale beneath the golden light. He looked from his grandfather to Amara, and for the first time that night, fear did not make him look powerful. It made him look small. Brianna recovered first. "Chairman Whitmore," she said with a bright smile, "there was simply a guest list issue. Nothing to concern yourself with. Miss Bennett seems to have arrived under a misunderstanding." Charles did not look at her. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, the words quiet enough to be polite and sharp enough to stop the air. The event coordinator swallowed. "Sir, her name was not marked for the main entrance. We were only following protocol." Charles finally turned his head, and the woman seemed to shrink without anyone touching her. "Protocol is useful," he said, "until it becomes an excuse to forget humanity." The hallway went silent. Amara lowered her eyes for a moment, not from shame, but because the sentence landed somewhere deep. She had spent years teaching young people to enter rooms that were not built with them in mind, telling them to carry their names with care, to speak clearly, to never mistake another person's prejudice for the truth about their worth. Yet standing there under the framed photographs of smiling donors, she realized how exhausting it was to be dignified in places that demanded proof of your dignity before offering respect. Charles stepped closer. His lined face softened as he reached Amara, and in front of everyone, he removed his black glove and extended his hand to her. It was not a performance. It was an invitation back into her own name. Amara hesitated only a second before placing her hand in his. He held it with the formal tenderness of a father escorting his daughter into a room that had forgotten its manners. Then he turned toward the gathered guests, toward Brianna, toward the staff, and finally toward Nathaniel. "Why?" Charles asked, his voice low and steady. "Is my family standing outside?" The sentence broke across the hallway without needing volume. Someone gasped. A phone slipped lower. Brianna's polished smile disappeared as if the light had been cut from it. Nathaniel did not speak. He stared at Amara's hand in his grandfather's, then at the woman he had denied only minutes earlier, and understanding began to move across his face with painful slowness. He had thought silence would protect his world. Now he saw that silence had only revealed the poverty inside it. Charles placed Amara's hand on his arm and faced the ballroom doors. "Open them," he said. No one questioned him. The velvet rope was moved. The doors widened. Golden music and candlelight spilled into the hallway. But this time Amara did not enter as a mistake waiting to be corrected. She entered beside the chairman, her steps quiet, her shoulders straight, her eyes forward. Every conversation in the ballroom fell away as they crossed the threshold together. The same guests who had watched her humiliation now watched her return, and not one of them could pretend the room had not changed. Amara felt Nathaniel somewhere behind her, but she did not look back. There are moments when a person learns that being chosen by power is not the same as belonging. And there are rarer moments when dignity walks into the room first, and power has no choice but to follow. The ballroom did not welcome Amara Bennett with applause. It welcomed her with silence, the kind that reveals more than noise ever could. Beneath the chandeliers of the Grand Meridian, 500 guests turned as Chairman Charles Whitmore escorted her across the marble floor, his silver cane tapping a calm rhythm beside her steady steps. Only minutes earlier, some of those same faces had watched her stand outside the velvet rope as if she were an interruption to their evening. Now they looked at her with startled politeness, rearranging their expressions into respect because a powerful man had finally given them permission to see what should have been obvious from the beginning. Amara felt the shift, and it did not comfort her. Respect that arrives only after endorsement is not respect. It is obedience dressed in manners. Charles led her to the front of the ballroom, where the Whitmore Foundation crest glowed on a large screen above the stage. The words Annual Education Gala shimmered in gold, surrounded by photographs of smiling students holding acceptance letters and wearing college sweatshirts. Amara knew those photographs. She had approved each one, making sure no child was used as a symbol without consent, making sure their stories were told with pride instead of pity. That detail mattered to her. People were not decoration for generosity. They were the reason generosity needed discipline. Nathaniel stood near the first row, unable to move, his champagne glass gone now, his hands empty at his sides. Brianna Vale lingered several feet away, her silver gown suddenly too bright, her confidence turning brittle beneath the weight of the room. Charles helped Amara onto the stage, then accepted a microphone from the host, a nervous man whose smile had vanished somewhere between confusion and fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles began, his voice calm enough to quiet even the distant clink of silverware. "Before tonight continues, a correction must be made." Amara looked out over the crowd, not searching for sympathy, not asking for rescue. She simply stood beside him, her navy dress dark and graceful beneath the lights, her face composed with the kind of strength people often mistake for ease. Charles turned slightly toward her. "Many of you came tonight to celebrate the expansion of the Whitmore Bennett Education Initiative. You have read the brochures. You have seen the numbers. You have applauded the mission." He paused, letting the room sit inside its own performance. "But most of you do not know the woman who carried that mission when it was only a promise on paper." A murmur rose softly, then disappeared. Charles continued. "Amara Bennett reviewed the first scholarship model. She corrected our outreach failures. She visited high schools in Queens, Newark, Baltimore, and South Chicago when our own committee believed a digital campaign would be enough. She told us that opportunity does not reach people simply because wealthy rooms announce it. Someone has to carry it across town, into classrooms, churches, libraries, and kitchen tables." Amara felt the words settle over her like warmth she had not asked for but had earned. Charles looked toward the screen, and the first slide changed. It showed Amara seated at a cafeteria table beside 3 students and 2 parents, her sleeves rolled up, papers spread before her, her smile tired but real. There were no diamonds in the photograph, no red carpet, no borrowed glamour. Only work, honest work. "This foundation bears my family name," Charles said, "but its conscience bears hers." Nathaniel lowered his eyes. Brianna looked away. The guests remained still, forced to meet a truth more elegant than any speech they had expected. Charles shifted the microphone, his hand steady despite his age. And for those wondering why I used the word family, let me be clear. Dr. Renee Bennett, Amara's mother, saved my wife's life 21 years ago after a highway accident outside Hartford. She asked for nothing. Later, when I wanted to repay her, she asked me to invest in children I would never meet. That request became the first seed of this initiative. When Dr. Bennett passed, her daughter did not come to us seeking favor. She came with research, discipline, and a plan strong enough to outlive all of us. Amara's throat tightened at the sound of her mother's name, but she remained upright. Her mother had believed that dignity was not something the world gave you. It was something you protected until the world learned how to recognize it. Charles turned back to the crowd. So tonight, the mistake was not that Miss Bennett arrived at the wrong entrance. The mistake was that anyone in this room believed a guest list could measure her belonging. The silence deepened, no longer cold, but humbled. Amara finally accepted the microphone when Charles offered it to her. She looked across the ballroom, past the donors, past Brianna, past Nathaniel, toward the students in the photographs behind her. "Thank you, Chairman Whitmore," she said softly. "But I hope tonight teaches us something larger than my name." Her voice did not shake. A person should not need a billionaire to confirm their worth before they are treated with basic respect. Amara Bennett held the microphone with both hands, not because she was afraid, but because she understood the weight of being heard by people who had almost chosen not to see her. The ballroom lights warmed her face, and beyond the stage, rows of donors sat in expensive silence, their programs folded in their laps, their smiles softened into something closer to attention. For the first time that evening, the room was not waiting to be entertained. It was waiting to learn what kind of truth she would allow it to survive. Amara looked at the scholarship photographs behind her, then at the tables filled with people whose names appeared on buildings, hospital wings, and museum plaques. "My mother used to tell me that education is not a ladder out of a community," she said. "It is a bridge back to it." The sentence moved gently through the ballroom, and somewhere near the center, Charles Whitmore lowered his head, as if remembering Dr. Renee Bennett's voice in those words. Amara continued, "When I was a child, I watched my mother come home after 12-hour shifts with tired feet and a full heart. She treated patients who could not always pay her. She answered phone calls from mothers who were scared, fathers who were embarrassed to ask for help, teenagers who did not know whether their dreams sounded foolish. She never asked what someone could give her before deciding what they deserved from her." The screen behind her changed to a black-and-white photograph of Dr. Renee Bennett standing outside a small clinic in Hartford, wearing a white coat and a smile that carried both strength and tenderness. Amara had not known that photograph would be shown. For one brief moment, her breath caught, but she did not break. She let the emotion pass through her and become steadiness. "That is the beginning of this foundation," she said. "Not wealth, not legacy, not reputation. A woman choosing compassion when no camera was present." At the first row, Nathaniel sat completely still. The man who had spent his life mastering boardrooms now looked powerless beneath the quiet force of his wife's grace. He remembered the nights Amara sat at their kitchen island surrounded by scholarship files, reading essays until after 2 in the morning, whispering the names of students as if each one were a promise. He remembered how often she had asked him to attend a community meeting, and how often he had answered that his schedule was impossible. He had mistaken her patience for acceptance. He had mistaken her humility for invisibility. Now the entire room was seeing what he had been too afraid to honor. Amara turned a page in her folded speech, though she no longer needed it. "Some of the students we serve have been told no so many times that a yes feels suspicious. Some have learned to make themselves smaller in rooms where they should have been welcomed. Some carry the pressure of becoming the first person in their family to step onto a college campus. And they do it while translating bills for their parents, caring for younger siblings, working evening shifts, and still showing up to class with hope in their backpacks." A woman near table 12 wiped her eyes. A man who had laughed earlier at the entrance lowered his gaze to the tablecloth. Amara did not accuse them. She did not need to. Truth, spoken without bitterness, has a way of finding every chair in a room. "So when we speak about charity," she said, "we must be careful. Charity can become a stage if we only love people when they are useful to our image. Real service begins when we protect their dignity even when no one is applauding us for it. Her eyes moved briefly toward the entrance hall, then back to the crowd. Respect should never be reserved for people who look expensive. The words landed with such clarity that even the musicians in the corner seemed to pause between notes. Brianna's face tightened, but she had lost the room. Not because Amara had humiliated her, but because Amara had lifted the conversation to a place where pettiness looked painfully small. Charles watched with quiet pride. Nathaniel watched with regret that had no place to go. Amara took one final breath. If this initiative is going to carry my mother's name, then it must carry her standard. Every student who walks through our doors will be treated not as a problem to be solved, but as a future to be respected. Every parent will be spoken to with patience. Every applicant will receive an answer. Every child will know that opportunity is not a favor from the powerful. It is a responsibility shared by all of us. For a moment, nothing happened. Then an older woman at the back of the ballroom stood. She was not famous, not seated at a sponsor table, only a retired public school principal who had been invited because one of her former students was featured in the program. Her applause was soft at first, two hands meeting with simple conviction. Then another guest stood. Then another. The sound grew, not wild, not dramatic, but deep and cleansing, as if the room was finally admitting what it should have known from the beginning. Amara lowered the microphone. She did not smile for victory. She smiled because somewhere, she believed her mother would have recognized the moment. Not as revenge, as repair. The applause followed Amara Bennett off the stage, but she did not let it touch her too deeply. Applause was a weather pattern in rooms like this, warm for a moment, then gone. What mattered was whether anything would change when the lights dimmed, when the cameras packed away, when the students in the photographs needed tuition deposits, bus passes, laptops, mentors, and someone patient enough to answer emails after office hours. Chairman Charles Whitmore met her at the foot of the stage and offered his arm again, not as a rescue this time, but as respect. Your mother would have been proud, he said quietly. Amara looked at the photograph still glowing on the screen, her mother's white coat bright against the clinic wall, and for the first time that night, her voice softened. I hope so. Charles nodded, then guided her toward a quieter corridor behind the ballroom, where the sound of the gala became muffled behind thick velvet doors. The hallway smelled faintly of roses and polished wood. Staff members moved carefully around them with trays of coffee and folded linens, their eyes kind but cautious, as if they had witnessed something sacred and were unsure how to behave afterward. Amara thanked each one who made space for her. She knew what it meant to be invisible while making an event look effortless. Near the service entrance, she paused by a tall window overlooking East 42nd Street, where yellow taxis moved through the rain like small pieces of light. Her reflection looked back at her from the glass, navy dress, steady shoulders, tired eyes. She had survived the public part. Now came the private wound. Footsteps approached. Behind her, slower than the others, familiar in a way her heart recognized before she turned. Nathaniel Whitmore stopped several feet away, no longer surrounded by donors, no longer protected by cameras or polite noise. Without the ballroom around him, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man standing in the wreckage of his own choice. Amara, he said. Her name sounded different from his mouth now, stripped of confidence. She kept her gaze on the window. You said you did not know me. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, regret had replaced every polished defense. I know. No, she said gently, turning toward him. You knew then too. The words were calm, but they struck deeper than anger would have. Nathaniel looked down at his hands, the same hands that had signed contracts, shaken hands with senators, held champagne while his wife stood outside a door. I was afraid, he said, of the board, of my family, of what people would say. Brianna had been pushing rumors for months, and I thought if I could just get through tonight, I could explain everything later. Amara studied him with a sadness that made excuses feel childish before they fully formed. Later is where cowards put the truth when the present asks for courage. Nathaniel swallowed, and the hallway seemed to grow quieter. You are right. She almost wished he had argued. It would have been easier to walk away from pride than from remorse. But remorse was not repair. It was only the first honest room after a long corridor of damage. I stood beside you when your father questioned my background, she said. I sat through dinners where people asked what school I attended before they asked what work I did. I smiled when reporters called me a community consultant because you said the timing was delicate. I accepted privacy because I believed it was protection, not erasure. Her gloved hand moved to the ring beneath the fabric, hidden from the cameras, hidden from the room, hidden exactly as he had hidden her. Slowly, she removed the glove, then the simple wedding band beneath it. Nathaniel's face changed when he saw it, not with surprise, but with the pain of finally looking at something he had avoided too long. Amara held the ring in her palm. You did not deny my name, Nathaniel. You denied your own promise. He stepped forward, then stopped himself, as if even his apology needed permission. Please do not say this is the end. Amara looked at the ring, remembering the courthouse, the rain outside, the way he had smiled when the clerk pronounced them married. She remembered believing that love could grow quietly until it was strong enough to stand in daylight. I am not saying anything dramatic, she said. I am saying I need space from the version of love that asks me to disappear so you can remain comfortable. She placed the ring in his hand and closed his fingers around it with a tenderness that made him bow his head. Do not use tonight to make another speech, she said. Use it to become honest. Then she stepped back, leaving him with the small circle of gold that suddenly weighed more than his entire empire. At the end of the corridor, Charles waited without interrupting, his expression solemn. Amara walked toward him, not as a woman rescued by a powerful family, but as a woman returning to herself. Behind her, Nathaniel remained by the window, holding the ring, watching her reflection disappear into the warm light of the hallway, and understanding at last that love without public respect is only a beautiful secret with nowhere safe to live. By midnight, the gala had ended, but the story had only begun. Outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, rain softened the edges of Manhattan, turning the sidewalks into mirrors of gold and red traffic lights. Inside, staff members cleared crystal glasses and folded ivory tablecloths while the last guests slipped into waiting cars, carrying with them the discomfort of a room that had been forced to examine itself beneath chandelier light. Amara Bennett left through the front entrance beside Chairman Charles Whitmore, not because she needed protection, but because he insisted the same door that had questioned her belongings should witness her dignity as she walked out. Reporters called her name from behind the barrier. Camera flashes brightened the wet pavement. Questions rose into the night, eager and overlapping. But Amara offered only a calm nod before stepping into the black town car Charles had arranged. She did not owe the world her pain while it was still fresh. Across the hotel lobby, Nathaniel Whitmore watched from behind the glass, the wedding band resting in his closed fist. No board member spoke to him. No donor approached him with sympathy. For once, his last name could not polish the moment. Brianna Vale stood near the coat check, surrounded by two women who had laughed with her earlier but now kept a careful distance, as if embarrassment could stain satin. She tried to lift her chin when Charles passed, but he stopped just long enough to look at her. Miss Vale, he said, his voice neither angry nor loud. Tomorrow morning, the Foundation Ethics Committee will review tonight's guest protocols and all related correspondence. Brianna's face lost color beneath the lobby's warm lights. Chairman, I only wanted to protect the event. Charles held her gaze. Protection that requires humiliation is not protection. It is vanity with a badge. He left her there without another word. By dawn, short videos from the gala had spread across every major platform. Some showed Amara at the entrance, standing still while Nathaniel denied knowing her. Others showed Charles taking her hand and calling her family. But the clip that traveled farthest was not the moment of scandal. It was Amara's speech, her voice steady as she said that respect should never be reserved for people who look expensive. Teachers shared it. Parents shared it. Former scholarship students shared it with captions about the woman who had answered their emails at midnight, corrected their essays, and helped them believe they belonged on campuses that once felt impossible. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Whitmore Global's public relations team had prepared 3 versions of a statement, each polished, careful, and empty. Nathaniel read them in his office on the 54th floor while the city moved below him in silver morning light. Every draft used words like unfortunate misunderstanding and regrettable incident. None of them used the word wife. None of them used the word cowardice. He deleted all 3. Then he looked at the ring on his desk, the simple gold circle glowing beside his phone, and for the first time in his adult life, he chose truth over control. At 10:30, he entered the emergency board meeting without his legal team's approved statement. The directors sat around the long walnut table with tight faces and untouched coffee, prepared to discuss damage containment, stock reactions, donor confidence, and the danger of admitting too much. Nathaniel stood at the head of the table and did not sit down. "Last night was not a misunderstanding," he said. The room went still. "Amara Bennett is my wife. I denied her publicly because I was afraid of how this world would judge our marriage. And in doing so, I became the very kind of man I once promised her I would never be." No one interrupted. Even the city beyond the windows seemed quieter. "This company does not need a better statement," he continued. "It needs better leadership. Starting today, Whitmore Global will commission an independent review of our foundation practices, event policies, hiring pipelines, and leadership culture. The results will be published, not summarized. Published." A director near the end of the table frowned. "Nathaniel, that level of transparency could expose us." Nathaniel looked at him. "Good. Whatever cannot survive honesty should not be protected by silence." Later that afternoon, Charles held a press conference in the Foundation auditorium. Amara stood at a separate podium, wearing a cream blazer and no wedding ring, her posture calm, her presence unmistakably her own. Charles announced that she would serve as executive director of the Whitmore Bennett Education Initiative, with full authority over scholarship distribution, student support, and community partnerships. Nathaniel attended, but he did not stand beside her. He stood in the second row, listening as the woman he had failed became the leader the room trusted. When Amara stepped to the microphone, she did not mention Brianna. She did not punish Nathaniel with public details. She spoke instead about systems, about dignity, about making sure no student, parent, employee, or guest would ever again need a famous name beside them to receive basic respect. And as the cameras focused on her, Nathaniel finally understood that her grace was not forgiveness. It was discipline. It was the kind of strength that refused to become cruel simply because cruelty had been offered first. Over the next 6 months, Amara Bennett learned that rebuilding a broken room required more than opening its doors. It required changing who held the keys. Her new office at the Whitmore Bennett Education Initiative was not on the executive floor with the skyline view. She chose a modest space on the 3rd floor, close to the student support team, where the phones rang constantly and the walls were covered with maps, college deadlines, thank you notes, and photographs of young people standing outside dorm rooms with nervous smiles and hopeful eyes. Every morning, she arrived before 8 o'clock with coffee in one hand and a folder in the other, dressed with quiet elegance, listening more than she spoke. She hired former public school counselors, bilingual family advocates, financial aid specialists, and first-generation college graduates who understood that getting into college was only the beginning. Staying there required transportation, meal plans, textbooks, mental health support, emergency funds, and someone to call when home felt far away. Under Amara's leadership, the initiative stopped measuring success by how beautiful the gala looked and started measuring it by how many students made it safely through their first semester. She created a rule that every scholarship recipient would receive a mentor for at least 2 years. She added parent workshops on financial aid forms, housing contracts, and student rights. She required every donor event to include students as speakers only when they wanted to share, never because their pain made a convenient story. People noticed, not because Amara chased attention, but because real work has a way of becoming visible when it helps people breathe. Schools in Queens, Newark, Baltimore, and South Chicago began calling the program by name. Community centers asked for partnership visits. Teachers who had grown tired of empty promises began sending students again. Charles Whitmore visited twice a month, always without photographers, always sitting in the same chair near the conference table, asking hard questions and writing down answers in a small leather notebook. He treated Amara not like a symbol of redemption for his family, but like the executive she had become. Nathaniel watched from a distance at first. He resigned temporarily from his chief executive duties and entered what the press called a leave of reflection, though he hated how soft that sounded. Reflection was not enough. He met with employees who had been overlooked, assistants who had been spoken over, managers who had learned to laugh at comments that were never funny, and young analysts who said the company celebrated diversity in brochures but rewarded sameness in promotions. He listened without correcting them. He apologized without asking to be comforted. He began to understand that the night of the gala had not been a single failure. It had been a mirror held up to a culture he had benefited from because it had always made room for him. One rainy afternoon in March, he arrived at Amara's office carrying 2 cardboard boxes of archived foundation files. He wore no designer watch, no publicist's smile, no expression that asked to be praised. "The records from the last 5 years," he said to her assistant. The review team asked for them. Amara looked up from a student retention report. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The office around them continued moving, phones ringing, printers humming, staff members discussing campus meal vouchers and emergency housing grants. Nathaniel seemed almost out of place there, not because he was unwelcome, but because the work did not bend around his presence. That was new for him. "Thank you," Amara said. The words were courteous, not intimate. He nodded. "There are more downstairs. I will bring them up." He did not ask her to talk. He did not mention the ring. He did not turn a simple errand into proof of transformation. He carried the boxes, one by one, until his white shirt was creased and his hands were marked with cardboard dust. Later, as he passed the conference room, he heard Amara speaking with a group of high school seniors from the Bronx. "Do not confuse access with belonging," she told them. "Access is when someone lets you into the room. Belonging is when the room changes because your voice is there." Nathaniel stopped just outside the door, unseen, and felt the sentence settle inside him like instruction. That evening, Amara found a small envelope on her desk. Inside was not a love letter, not an apology meant to soften her boundaries, but a signed authorization transferring a portion of Nathaniel's private shares into a permanent student emergency fund controlled by an independent board. A note rested beneath it. It said, "No speech, no cameras, just something that should have existed before." Amara read it once, then placed it in the foundation file where it belonged. She did not smile like a wife forgiving a husband. She breathed like a woman watching accountability take its first honest shape. Outside her office window, the city lights came on one by one, and for the first time since the gala, the future did not feel like a door closing. It felt like a building under repair. 1 year later, the Grand Meridian Hotel looked almost the same from the outside, its golden canopy glowing above the Manhattan sidewalk, its marble steps polished beneath a clear October sky. But inside, the gala had changed in ways no chandelier could measure. The velvet rope was gone. The registration tables had been moved closer to the entrance, staffed by foundation volunteers trained to greet every guest by name and every student with warmth. The first faces on the large screens were not donors or executives, but scholarship recipients arriving on college campuses across the country, smiling outside dorm buildings in Boston, Atlanta, Chicago, and Los Angeles, holding notebooks, winter coats, and the quiet astonishment of young people beginning lives they once thought belonged to someone else. Amara Bennett stood near the ballroom doors in a deep emerald dress, reviewing the final program with a senior from Queens named Marisol Alvarez, who would speak that evening about becoming the first person in her family to study biomedical engineering. "You do not have to make your story painful to make it powerful," Amara reminded her. "Tell them what you want them to understand, not what they think they are entitled to know." Marisol nodded, breathing easier. Across the room, Charles Whitmore sat with a group of students instead of at the head table, laughing softly as one young man explained how confusing laundry machines were during his first week at college. He looked older now, his silver cane resting beside his chair, but his eyes carried the satisfaction of someone who had finally seen his family name attached to useful work. Nathaniel Whitmore arrived without photographers, wearing a simple black suit and carrying a box of printed programs. He had spent the afternoon helping volunteers set up chairs, test microphones, and label scholarship folders. Some guests still watched him with curiosity, waiting for the grand gesture, the public apology repeated for comfort, the romantic scene that would make the story easier to package. But Nathaniel had learned that real repair rarely looks dramatic. It looks like showing up early, staying late, telling the truth when no one is filming, and accepting that forgiveness cannot be scheduled like a board meeting. When he saw Amara, he stopped several feet away, giving her the space he had once failed to protect. "The student speakers are ready," he said, "and the emergency fund report is in every donor packet." Amara looked at him for a moment. There was still history between them, still tenderness buried beneath caution, still a wound that had closed enough to breathe, but not enough to pretend it had never existed. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, and for once, he did not ask for more. The program began at 7 o'clock. Marisol spoke first, not about poverty as a performance, but about her mother teaching her to solve math problems on grocery receipts, about a guidance counselor who stayed after school to help her fill out applications, about the day the foundation called to say she would not have to choose between tuition and helping her family pay rent. The room listened differently than it had a year before. Not perfectly. No room changes. Completely in one season. But people leaned forward. They heard names, not statistics. They saw futures, not charity cases. When Amara stepped onto the stage near the end of the night, the applause was steady, respectful, and free of surprise. That mattered. She looked out at the students seated among donors, at parents wearing their best suits and church dresses, at staff members who had made the program stronger than any speech could claim. "Last year, this room taught me something painful," she said. "It taught me that access can be offered without respect. This year, I hope we are learning something better. Belonging is not created by letting someone enter a beautiful room. Belonging is created when the room becomes more honest because they are there." Charles wiped at one eye with a handkerchief and did not try to hide it. Nathaniel stood near the back, listening with both hands folded in front of him, the wedding ring still absent from her finger and resting instead on a chain beneath his shirt, not as a claim, but as a reminder. After the gala ended, Amara stepped into the quiet hallway where everything had changed 1 year earlier. Nathaniel found her there, but he did not crowd the silence. "I am still learning," he said. "I know that does not erase what happened." Amara looked through the glass toward the city lights. "No, it does not." Then she turned to him, her expression gentle but clear. "But learning is different from performing. I can see the difference now." For the first time, hope entered the space between them without demanding an answer. Charles appeared at the end of the hallway, his cane tapping softly, his smile tired and proud. He placed one hand on Amara's shoulder and the other on Nathaniel's arm. "Family is not the name people give you," he said. "It is the dignity they protect when the room turns against you." Amara looked back toward the ballroom, where students were taking pictures with their parents beneath the foundation banner bearing her mother's name. She did not know exactly what her marriage would become. She only knew what she had become, a woman no longer waiting outside any door for someone else to decide whether she belonged. And as the lights of Manhattan shimmered beyond the windows, Amara Bennett walked forward, not into someone else's world, but into the life she had helped build with courage, compassion, and a dignity no one could deny.